Sometimes the people carrying the heaviest burdens are the ones everyone overlooks. My name is Emily Carter, and on the night everything changed, I was standing behind Register 7 at Moretti Market, trying to survive the last hour of a 12-hour shift. The supermarket was bright enough to make midnight feel like noon. Fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors. Shopping carts rolled through wide aisles. Families filled baskets with groceries while employees rushed to restock shelves before closing. To most customers, it was just another store. To me, it was the place that kept the lights on in my apartment and helped pay for my mother's medical treatments. I adjusted my name tag and forced another smile as the line in front of me slowly moved forward. My feet hurt. My shoulders ached. I had already worked 6 days that week, and tomorrow would make 7. Still, I reminded myself that being tired was a luxury. There were bills waiting on my kitchen table. Prescription costs. Utility payments. Rent. Every hour mattered. The evening had been relatively quiet until a woman wearing an expensive designer coat stepped into my line. She placed several items on the conveyor belt and checked her phone while I scanned everything. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then the register displayed an error connected to a promotional discount. It was a simple issue, one I had solved dozens of times before. "I apologize," I said politely. "The system is not applying the discount correctly. Let me fix that for you." The woman lowered her phone and frowned. "What do you mean it is not applying correctly?" Her voice carried farther than necessary. I explained the situation calmly and called for a supervisor to verify the promotion. Instead of waiting, the customer became increasingly frustrated. More shoppers began glancing toward our register. The line behind her grew longer. I kept my eyes on the screen, hoping the issue would be resolved quickly. It was not. The comments became sharper, louder. Several people stopped shopping entirely and watched. Heat rushed into my face. I focused on staying professional while my supervisor hurried across the store. The worst part was not the criticism. The worst part was the feeling that nobody cared how difficult the moment felt. I stared at the receipt printer because looking up seemed harder than breathing. Around me, cash registers continued beeping. Shopping carts continued rolling. Life continued moving forward as if nothing unusual was happening. Finally, the supervisor arrived and corrected the promotion within seconds. The issue ended. The customer collected her bags and left without another word. The crowd dispersed. The line moved forward. Everything returned to normal, at least on the surface. Inside, I felt exhausted. Not because of the mistake. Because of the attention. Because some days it seemed as though kindness was expected but never returned. When my shift finally ended, I helped straighten displays near the front entrance and prepared to clock out. Above the sales floor, hidden within a network of security cameras monitoring every aisle and register, a recording of the entire interaction had already been saved. Hundreds of miles of business reports waited to be reviewed that night. Yet, somewhere high above the city, the owner of the entire supermarket chain was about to stop everything because of one employee wearing a simple name tag and a tired smile. By the time I reached my apartment that night, the city had already gone quiet. Streetlights cast long reflections across wet pavement outside my window, while distant traffic hummed somewhere beyond the buildings. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter and immediately noticed the familiar stack of envelopes waiting beside the coffee maker. Medical bills. Insurance notices. Utility statements. They seemed to multiply faster than I could pay them. I took a deep breath and opened the refrigerator. Half a carton of milk. Eggs. Leftover pasta. Enough to get through another week if I was careful. My phone vibrated on the counter. A message from the rehabilitation center where my mother was receiving treatment. Her therapy session had gone well. The update should have made me feel relieved, and it did, but relief had become complicated lately. Every piece of good news seemed attached to another expense. I sat at the small kitchen table and stared at the numbers on the bills without really seeing them. My mind kept drifting back to the supermarket, to the crowded checkout lane, to the feeling of dozens of strangers watching. Eventually, I pushed the papers aside and went to bed. The next morning arrived too quickly. By 7 o'clock, I was already back in uniform, standing beneath bright store lights as customers filled carts with groceries. The world had moved on from yesterday. At least I thought it had. Around noon, the store manager appeared near Register 7. He rarely spent time on the sales floor unless something important was happening. "Emily," he said, motioning for me to step aside. My stomach tightened immediately. Employees learn to recognize that tone. It usually means trouble. I followed him toward his office near the back of the building. Every possible disaster raced through my head. Had I made another mistake? Was there a customer complaint? Was I about to lose my job? The manager closed the office door and looked strangely uncomfortable. "You're not in trouble," he said before I could ask. Relief arrived, but confusion quickly followed. "Then what is this about?" He glanced down at a document on his desk. "Corporate headquarters requested information about you this morning." I blinked. "About me?" He nodded. "Employment records. Performance reviews. Attendance history." For a moment, I genuinely wondered if he had confused me with someone else. Corporate headquarters managed hundreds of stores, thousands of employees. Nobody there knew who I was. Or at least they should not have. Why would they want that? I asked. The manager shook his head. "I do not know." That answer did not help. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart jumped. Every time a supervisor walked by, I expected another conversation. Nothing happened. Customers came and went. Registers beeped. Shopping carts rolled across polished floors. Yet beneath the normal rhythm of the day, a strange feeling lingered. Somewhere far above my world of price tags and checkout lanes, someone had noticed my existence. And at that exact moment, inside a private office overlooking the city's skyline, Vincent Moretti watched a security recording for the third time and asked a question that would soon change everything. "Who is that employee?" Then he looked toward his executive assistant and gave a simple instruction. "Bring her to me." The invitation arrived the following afternoon. Not by email. Not through a supervisor. A woman in a navy business suit walked into the store carrying a leather portfolio and asked for me by name. Every employee nearby immediately noticed. My manager looked just as confused as I felt. "Emily Carter," the woman asked politely. I nodded. "Yes." She offered a professional smile. "My name is Claire. I work for Moretti Holdings. Mr. Vincent Moretti would like to meet with you tomorrow morning." For several seconds, I simply stared at her. The words made no sense. Vincent Moretti was not just the owner of our supermarket chain. He was the owner of hundreds of businesses across the state. People like him did not schedule meetings with cashiers. They certainly did not send representatives directly to stores. "There must be some mistake," I said. Claire shook her head. "There is no mistake." She handed me a business card with an address printed in silver lettering. The headquarters building was located downtown in one of the most recognizable towers in the city. "Transportation has been arranged if needed." I looked down at the card. My pulse quickened. "May I ask why he wants to meet me?" Claire's smile remained professional. "Mr. Moretti prefers to discuss that personally." Then she thanked me for my time and left. The entire store seemed to freeze for a moment after the door closed behind her. Questions immediately followed. My coworkers were curious. My manager was curious. I was the most curious person in the building. Unfortunately, I had no answers. That night, sleep refused to cooperate. Every possible explanation passed through my mind. Maybe there had been a complaint. Maybe I had unknowingly violated company policy. Maybe this meeting would end with a termination notice. By morning, anxiety had exhausted me more thoroughly than any work shift. At 9 o'clock, a black sedan arrived outside my apartment exactly on schedule. The driver opened the door without saying much. Downtown skyscrapers slowly appeared through the window as we traveled toward the city center. When we finally reached Moretti Holdings Tower, I felt smaller than I had in years. The lobby alone looked larger than my entire supermarket. Marble floors reflected sunlight pouring through enormous glass walls. Security personnel greeted visitors by name. Executives crossed the lobby carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except me. An assistant escorted me to a private elevator reserved for senior leadership. 20 seconds later, the doors opened onto the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of the city below. The office felt quiet, powerful, intentional. A few moments later, a door opened. Vincent Moretti entered. Dark suit, calm expression, confident without appearing intimidating. He looked exactly like a man accustomed to making important decisions. Yet when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly measured. "Miss Carter." I stood immediately. "Good morning." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Once we were seated across from one another, a brief silence settled between us. Then Vincent reached for a remote control resting on the conference table. A large screen illuminated behind him. The moment the video appeared, my stomach dropped. Register 7. The supermarket. The customer. Me. Vincent paused the footage and looked directly at me. "Emily," he said quietly. "There is something I would like to understand." His expression remained thoughtful. "Why were you the only person apologizing that day?" For a moment, I could not answer. The frozen image on the screen behind Vincent showed me standing at Register 7, trying to remain professional while the situation unfolded around me. Seeing it from another angle felt strange, almost unreal. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. "Because it seemed easier," I finally said. Vincent remained quiet. The kind of quiet that made people think more carefully about their answers. "Easier for who?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Nobody had ever asked me that before. Customers expected apologies. Supervisors expected professionalism. Employees learned very quickly that keeping the peace mattered more than being right. "For everyone," I said softly. Vincent leaned back slightly. "And what about you?" I looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thousands of people moved through streets below. From this height, everyone looked small. Yet somehow I felt more exposed sitting in that office than I ever had standing in front of a crowded checkout lane. "I am used to it," I admitted. The answer seemed to bother him. Not because he disagreed. Because he understood. Vincent stood and walked toward the windows. Sunlight reflected across nearby buildings while traffic moved steadily below. "Do you know what I saw when I watched that recording?" he asked. I shook my head. "I saw an employee trying to help a customer." He turned toward me. "I saw someone remaining calm while under pressure." His expression remained thoughtful. "I also saw an entire store move on as though none of it mattered afterward." The words settled heavily in the room. Because they were true. Nobody had asked if I was all right. Nobody had meant any harm. They were simply busy. Life moved quickly. People moved on. Vincent returned to the table and sat down across from me again. "Emily, how long have you worked for the company?" "Almost 3 years." He nodded. "Attendance record?" "I have never missed a shift." "Performance reviews?" "Good, I think." A faint smile appeared. "They are excellent." Heat immediately rushed into my face. Compliments always made me uncomfortable. Vincent noticed. "Why does that embarrass you?" I laughed softly despite myself. "I do not know." "You should." His voice remained calm. "Most people spend their lives hoping someone notices their effort." He paused. "You seem uncomfortable whenever it happens." I had no answer for that. The truth was simple. Recognition felt unfamiliar. I was more comfortable being invisible. Vincent studied me for a moment before changing the subject. "Your personnel file mentioned family medical responsibilities." My shoulders tensed instinctively. "My mother is in rehabilitation." His expression softened slightly. "That cannot be easy." 3 simple words. Yet they nearly broke something inside me. Because they were the first words anyone had spoken about my situation without immediately discussing costs, paperwork, or logistics. Just acknowledgement. Just understanding. I looked away for a second and nodded. Some days are harder than others. The room became quiet again. Not awkward. Gentle. Respectful. Finally, Vincent spoke. "Emily, I did not ask you here because of a customer complaint." Relief spread through me immediately. "I asked you here because I wanted to meet the person behind the name tag." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had ever described me that way before. For years, I had believed I was just another employee scanning groceries beneath fluorescent lights. Yet, sitting across from Vincent Moretti, I had the strange feeling that he was looking at possibilities I could not yet see in myself. And before I left that office, he was about to ask a question that would change the direction of my future. When I left Moretti Holdings that afternoon, the city looked different. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. Traffic still filled every intersection. Yet something inside me had shifted. Vincent's final question continued replaying in my mind during the drive home. Emily, if you were not spending all your energy surviving, what would you want for your future? Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not my supervisors. Not my coworkers. Not even myself. Survival had consumed so much of my attention that dreaming felt irresponsible. That evening, after visiting my mother, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. Medical paperwork covered one side of the table. Unpaid bills occupied the other. In the middle sat a leather notebook Claire had handed me before I left the office. A simple gift. Dark blue cover. Blank pages. Inside the front cover was a handwritten note. For words. Right beyond your circumstances. I stared at the sentence for several minutes. Then I opened to the first page. At first, I wrote practical goals. Pay down debt. Build savings. Help mom recover. Find a way to work fewer overtime shifts. But the longer I sat there, the more honest I became. Take management classes. Learn leadership skills. Stop apologizing for existing. Believe I deserve opportunities too. By the time I set down the pen, something felt different. Not solved. Not fixed. Just possible. Over the following weeks, the notebook became part of my daily routine. Every morning before work, I wrote one small goal. Every evening, I recorded one thing I had done well. At first, the entries seemed insignificant. Arrived early. Helped a customer. Completed inventory accurately. Yet slowly, a pattern emerged. I was accomplishing far more than I ever gave myself credit for. One afternoon, while organizing products near the customer service desk, my manager approached carrying a tablet. Emily, corporate wants you enrolled in a development program. I looked up in surprise. What kind of program? Store leadership training. He smiled. Congratulations. The words took a moment to register. Leadership training was typically reserved for assistant managers and department supervisors. Not cashiers. Not people like me. At least that was what the old version of Emily Carter would have believed. The new version remembered the notebook. The new version remembered Vincent's question. A week later, I attended my first training session at a regional conference center. Employees from stores across the state filled the room. Some already held management positions. Others had years more experience than I did. At first, insecurity returned. The familiar voice inside my head whispered that I did not belong there. Then I remembered something Vincent had said during our meeting. Potential does not disappear simply because nobody notices it. For the first time in years, I chose not to argue with myself. I participated in discussions, asked questions, shared ideas. By the end of the day, people were seeking my opinion. The realization felt almost surreal. Across the city, Vincent Moretti reviewed quarterly reports inside his office. Hundreds of pages crossed his desk each week. Yet when an update regarding the leadership program appeared among them, he paused. The report mentioned one employee in particular. Emily Carter. Outstanding participation. Exceptional customer service history. Strong leadership potential. A small smile appeared before he closed the file. Because long before I started believing in myself, Vincent had already seen the person I was becoming. And neither of us knew that the next challenge would reveal just how much I had changed. 3 months later, I was no longer the same employee who had stood nervously behind Register 7. I still wore the same company logo on my uniform. I still worked hard. I still worried about my mother's recovery and the responsibilities waiting at home. But something fundamental had changed. I no longer viewed myself as invisible. The leadership program had become one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Each week brought new challenges, new skills, and new opportunities to grow. My supervisors began trusting me with greater responsibilities. Team members started coming to me for guidance. For the first time, I could actually picture a future beyond the checkout lane. Then one Saturday afternoon, life decided to test everything I had learned. The supermarket was unusually busy. Weekend shoppers filled every aisle. Families pushed carts loaded with groceries while employees worked quickly to keep shelves stocked. I was helping coordinate front-end operations when a familiar voice reached my ears. I recognized it immediately. The woman from that night. The same customer whose frustration had turned an ordinary shift into one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my career. She stood near customer service speaking with a newer employee who looked increasingly nervous. The young cashier could not have been older than 19. Her hands shook slightly while trying to explain a pricing issue. The scene felt painfully familiar. A crowd was already beginning to form. Curious customers slowed down to watch. Months earlier, I would have stayed quiet and hoped someone else handled the situation. This time was different. I walked toward the counter calmly. "Good afternoon," I said with a professional smile. "My name is Emily. Let me help." The young cashier immediately looked relieved. The customer crossed her arms. "I have already explained the problem." Her tone suggested she expected another uncomfortable interaction. Instead, I listened carefully. I reviewed the receipt. I checked the promotion. Within a minute, I identified the issue. A simple system update had not processed correctly. The solution was straightforward. "I understand the frustration," I said politely. "We can correct this immediately." The customer seemed surprised by how calmly the conversation unfolded. There was no defensiveness, no embarrassment, no panic, just confidence. The problem was resolved in less than 2 minutes. As the customer prepared to leave, she hesitated. For a brief moment, her expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she walked away. The words were simple, yet they carried unexpected meaning. Not because I needed her approval, because I realized I no longer feared situations like this. The young cashier beside me exhaled with relief. I thought I was going to mess everything up. I smiled. "Everyone feels that way sometimes." Her shoulders relaxed. "How did you stay so calm?" The answer came more easily than I expected. "Because mistakes do not define you." Later that evening, after the store closed, I reflected on the encounter while finishing paperwork in the manager's office. Months earlier, the same situation would have ruined my entire day. Now it felt like proof of growth. Somewhere across the city, Vincent Moretti received a routine report about employee leadership development. One particular note caught his attention. Emily Carter successfully mentored a new employee during a high-pressure customer interaction. Vincent smiled slightly before setting the report aside, because the confidence he had once seen hidden beneath exhaustion was finally becoming visible to everyone else. A few weeks later, an announcement appeared in every Moretti market location across the state. Employees found printed notices in break rooms. Managers discussed it during staff meetings. Corporate emails reached every department. At first, nobody paid much attention. Large companies released new policies all the time. Most people expected another update about procedures or efficiency targets. This announcement was different. I was standing beside the customer service desk when my manager handed me a copy. The headline immediately caught my attention: Employee Dignity and Support Initiative. I read the document once, then a second time, then a third. The new policy required additional support training for supervisors, clearer procedures for handling difficult customer situations, expanded employee wellness resources, recognition programs for frontline staff. Most surprising of all, the message emphasized a principle rarely discussed in retail environments. Respect was expected for employees as much as customers. Around me, coworkers exchanged surprised looks. Some seemed skeptical. Others appeared genuinely hopeful. "Do you think any of this will actually matter?" one cashier asked. I looked down at the document again. For some reason, I already knew the answer. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think it will." Over the following months, the changes became visible. Managers received new leadership training. Employee concerns were addressed more quickly. Outstanding work received recognition instead of being quietly assumed. Small improvements appeared everywhere. None of them were dramatic on their own. Together, they transformed the atmosphere of the stores. One afternoon, I was asked to attend a regional leadership conference representing our location. The event brought together supervisors, department managers, and high-performing employees from across the company. Hundreds of people filled a large conference hall overlooking the river. I felt nervous walking inside. Even after everything that had happened, part of me still expected someone to tell me I did not belong there. The opening presentations focused on company growth and future goals. Then the final speaker stepped onto the stage. Vincent Moretti. The room immediately became silent. He spoke about business, leadership, and responsibility. His voice remained calm but carried throughout the hall effortlessly. Then he said something that made me stop taking notes. The success of any organization is determined by the people others overlook. The room listened carefully. Vincent continued. The individuals greeting customers, restocking shelves, solving problems nobody notices. Those people are not invisible. They are the foundation. Applause filled the hall. Yet Vincent was not finished. A company reveals its character by how it treats people who have the least power. The words struck me harder than I expected. Because months earlier, I had been one of those people. Someone working long hours beneath bright store lights while trying to hold together a difficult life outside of work. Someone convinced her effort would never matter. After the presentation ended, attendees gathered throughout the conference center. Conversations filled every corner of the building. To my complete surprise, several employees approached me directly. They recognized me from leadership training sessions and asked for advice regarding customer service and team communication. The old version of me would have assumed they were talking to the wrong person. The new version listened, shared experiences, and offered encouragement. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Claire found me near the lobby. "Mr. Moretti asked me to give you this." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note containing only one sentence. "You are becoming exactly who you were always capable of being." I stood there staring at those words while the city lights reflected through the glass walls around me. For the first time, I realized that this journey had never been about earning someone else's belief. It was about finally accepting my own. 6 months after my first meeting with Vincent Moretti, life looked very different from the one I had known behind Register 7. The changes had not happened overnight. They had arrived through hundreds of small decisions, difficult mornings, and quiet moments when I chose growth instead of fear. I was now completing the final stage of the company leadership program. My responsibilities had expanded. I assisted with employee training, coordinated operational projects, and regularly worked alongside store management teams. More importantly, I had started believing that my future could be larger than my circumstances. My mother's recovery was progressing steadily. She was stronger than she had been in years. Some evenings we sat together on the small balcony outside my apartment, watching the city lights appear one by one as the sun disappeared beyond the skyline. During those conversations, she often noticed changes in me before I did. "You stand differently now," she told me one evening. I laughed softly. "What does that mean?" She smiled. "You look like someone who finally trusts herself." The comment stayed with me. Because she was right. For years, I had moved through life waiting for permission to feel confident. Somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation from corporate headquarters. The leadership program was hosting a final evaluation event. Participants from across the company would present improvement projects they had developed during training. Executives would attend. Senior management would attend. Vincent would attend. The thought alone made me nervous. The event took place inside a modern conference center overlooking the river. More than 200 employees filled the room. Each participant had prepared a presentation focused on improving operations, customer experience, or employee support. My project centered on something deeply personal: frontline employee recognition and mentorship. I spoke about the impact of encouragement, about the difference one conversation could make, about how unnoticed employees often carried extraordinary potential. As I stood before the audience, I realized something remarkable. I was no longer afraid of being seen. When the presentation ended, applause filled the room. Several executives approached afterward to discuss my ideas. One even suggested implementing parts of the proposal company-wide. The possibility felt surreal. Later that afternoon, participants gathered for the closing ceremony. Awards were presented. Achievements were recognized. Then a senior executive stepped onto the stage holding an envelope. This year's emerging leadership recognition goes to Emily Carter. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard. The room erupted into applause. My hands trembled slightly as I walked toward the stage. Bright lights reflected across the ballroom ceiling. Faces smiled from every direction. Somewhere near the front row, Vincent watched quietly. As I accepted the award, I remembered the exhausted woman who once sat alone at a kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills. The woman who believed nobody noticed her effort. The distance between those two versions of myself suddenly felt impossible to measure. After the ceremony ended, guests slowly began leaving the conference center. I stepped onto an outdoor terrace overlooking the river. Evening sunlight reflected across the water. A cool breeze moved through the city. A few moments later, Vincent joined me. Neither of us spoke immediately. We simply watched the skyline together. Finally, he smiled. "You did not need anyone to save you, Emily." I looked toward the river. "No." Vincent nodded. "You only needed someone to remind you who you were." The words settled gently between us. Because deep down, we both understood they were true. And standing there beneath the fading light, I realized the most important chapter of my life was only beginning. 1 year later, I stood beneath the bright entrance lights of the same supermarket where everything had begun. The automatic doors opened and closed as customers entered carrying shopping lists and everyday concerns. Shopping carts rolled across polished floors. Employees greeted visitors. Life moved exactly as it always had. Yet for me, nothing was the same. I was no longer working behind register 7. I was no longer counting every dollar before buying groceries. I was no longer convinced that my future would be limited by my circumstances. After completing the leadership program, I accepted a regional operations position within Moretti Markets. The role allowed me to travel between locations, mentor employees, and help implement programs designed to support frontline staff. Every week, I met people who reminded me of the person I used to be. Hardworking, dedicated, invisible. Whenever possible, I made sure they understood something I had learned the difficult way. Being overlooked does not mean you lack value. My mother's recovery continued steadily. She had returned home months earlier. Our small apartment felt brighter now. Lighter. The constant pressure that once dominated every conversation had slowly faded. There were still challenges, of course. Life always creates new ones. But hope had replaced fear as the louder voice. On this particular afternoon, I had returned to the store for a special event celebrating employee achievements. Managers, supervisors, and staff gathered near the front entrance while customers continued shopping around them. Several employees I had once worked beside now held leadership positions of their own. Watching them succeed filled me with pride. During the ceremony, one young cashier stepped forward to receive recognition for outstanding customer service. She looked nervous standing before the crowd. I recognized that feeling immediately. Afterward, she approached me. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She hesitated. "Did you ever think you would end up doing what you do now?" I smiled. The answer was easy. "Not even once." She laughed softly. "Then how did it happen?" For a moment, I looked around the store. The checkout lanes. The customers. The familiar aisles. Memories returned with surprising clarity. Then I answered honestly. Someone noticed me when I had stopped noticing myself. Her expression softened. "That is a good answer." Later that evening, after the celebration ended, I stepped outside into the cool air. The parking lot glowed beneath rows of lights. Across the street, the city's skyline stretched toward the horizon. A black sedan pulled quietly to the curb. Vincent Moretti stepped out and joined me near the entrance. We had not seen each other in several months. Yet the conversation felt as natural as ever. "Looks different from this side of the doors," he said. I laughed. "It does." We stood together watching employees leave for the evening. Some headed home to families. Others prepared for tomorrow's responsibilities. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Vincent glanced toward the store. "Do you remember the first time I saw that security footage?" "I do." A faint smile appeared. "You looked exhausted." I was exhausted. "And now?" I looked through the glass doors at the employees laughing together as they finished their shifts. Then I looked toward the future waiting beyond the parking lot. "Now I am grateful." Vincent nodded. No further explanation was necessary, because both of us understood the truth. The most important thing he ever gave me was not an opportunity. It was perspective. He reminded me that dignity matters. That effort matters. That character matters. As the evening lights reflected across the supermarket windows, I realized the moment that once felt like the worst day of my life had become the beginning of everything good that followed. And sometimes the people who change your future do not rescue you from your circumstances. They simply help you see that you are always stronger than you believed.